which I've adapted for myself, is the idea that the whole idea of spirituality, the whole idea of beliefs, are very much connected with a place. That is to say, if certain beliefs came up in a certain place, then they have validity for that place. And if we believe that the entire universe is one, then there's no real difference in a Christian in Europe, or a Jew in the Middle East, or a Hindu in India, believing in different gods and different icons, because at the end of the day, they're all the same. I had occasion to use this in the middle of the 1990s when, as a young expat, I found myself in Zimbabwe in Africa. As every first-time expat probably does, I was newly married, just my wife and myself, barely 30 years old, not even 30 years old. You rent the biggest house you possibly can. Not very spiritual, but nevertheless, this is what expats do, and all you have to do is look around here in Bangalore and you can see the same thing. And this really was a beautiful house. It was spread out over hundreds and hundreds of square feet on one floor with a little tile roof above. And we really had a good life there. And the African weather, the African culture, except for one thing. When we would sit around the house in the afternoons or in the evenings, or perhaps on a Saturday morning, there would be the sound of footsteps coming from above. Maybe we had rats, our friends told us. I didn't accept that. If they were rats, they would have to be rats wearing work boots. And this went up and down the house. But you sort of get used to that sort of thing. You get used to it, and your friends come and they notice it, but nevertheless you say, oh, well, you know, and just kind of laughingly, well, that's our ghost. One day, something changed all that. My wife and I were asleep in our bed. It must have been around 2 o'clock in the morning. And we were deeply asleep. It wasn't that we were just fading off, but we were actually deeply asleep. And while we were there, sleeping calmly in our beds, in the quiet of the still of the night, suddenly, the sound of a piano crashing down over our heads above us. My eyes flew open, my heart was pounding, and I was wondering if my wife had heard this as well, or maybe it was my imagination, or maybe it was one of those head crashes we sometimes have. When I looked over at her, her eyes were open too, and she was trembling with fear and said she had heard the sound. So I rationalized it to myself. I said, okay. Next morning I went up into the transom to look. Maybe something had fallen over our bed. Maybe a beam had cracked. But the truth is there was no room there, not for a person, not even for a rat. So as I said before, assuming or accepting that local beliefs were the answer to this question, I went to one of the workers in my office and asked her if there was something to be done about a noisy house under these circumstances. She looked at me and said, oh, of course, we do that. And Saturday was the day. On Saturday, she came to our home accompanied by another 12 women in flowing white gowns and one man in a flowing black beard. And they asked what the problem was. We explained the problem. My employee translated that for the older gentleman. He nodded his head, says, we can definitely take care of that sort of thing. Please bring a bucket of water. So we brought a bucket of water. He sprinkled water in the four corners of the house. And then they sat down and began to sing. I think it's doing a disservice to them to say that they were singing. The songs they were singing were an integration of African traditional beliefs and of Christian devotional hymns. They were sung out of the 13 people there in at least 4 or 5-part harmony, and their voices shook the rafters of the house. And they sang, and they sang, and they sang. And after singing about 8 songs, it's not about 8 songs, it is 8 songs, I counted them. After singing about 8 songs, they sat down, the old man came up to me, informed me that the house was in fact being haunted by somebody who had lived there before. He had unfinished business, had nothing against me or my wife, but just for good measure they had banished him outside the garden walls. So we wouldn't be bothered there anymore. I asked him if he'd like a drink, a glass of juice. He said, of course. So we gave glasses of juice to the whole group. I asked them maybe if they'd like some bread with the juice. He said, of course. We gave bread to the whole group. And we one by one took everything out of the refrigerator. The people left after about an hour and a half in our house. And I had 3 recognitions. Recognition number 1 was that we had received an amazing concert of African devotional music in our own home. Second of all, we had our spring cleaning performed on our refrigerator without paying for it. And the third thing we noticed only after a day and a night and another day, the house was silent.